What are some solved mysteries? The disappearance of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, author of The Little Prince, who was also a French reconnaissance pilot during World War II. In 1944, he took off on a reconnaissance mission from Corsica and never made it back. And there was never any evidence of what might have happened to him and his plane. Finally, in 1998, a French fisherman pulled up his net and found wrapped in it a silver bracelet engraved with Saint-Exupéry's name. And in 2004, a diver searched in the area and found the remains of his plane, which had apparently been shot down by a German fighter after all. Not exactly solved, as there's number 100% confirmation. But the whole "what's the main buyer of glitter" craze from a while back. Turns out it's highly likely, basically confirmed IMO, that it's boat paint. Just boat paint. The Siberian Craters. As the permafrost melts, the methane gas gets released and it sometimes ignites. While it doesn't give us who the Zodiac Killer is, just recently his most infamous 340 cipher was solved after 51 years. Benjamin Kyle. Man found beating behind a Burger King with severe amnesia. It was a fascinating mystery until it was solved. Then it was kind of sad. He had made TV appearances, had a couple of Amazon Reddit, but no one could identify him. When his identity was discovered, William Burgess Powell, there was still a 20-year gap in his life from 1984 to 2004. There's no record he had done anything. He had distanced himself from his family and had no friends, which is why no one recognized or identified him from his TV appearances. Adventures with Purpose. A great YouTube channel where a group of divers find missing people underwater after years when the local authorities don't care anymore or just don't have the resources. El Dorado, or the Lost City of Gold, turned out to be a mistranslation. It was just the name of some guy that got mistranslated to the name of a city. Sounds like exactly what someone who is on the trail would say. Where is the Titanic? Most people don't realize that half of the people in the world grew up when the ship's location was still a complete mystery. Now, it's old news. What's the purpose of the appendix really? Dumbass appendix tried to kill me. Memories of Murder. A movie based on true story about South Korea's first serial murderer. Confession was made in 2019 after more than 30 years. He was already in jail for raping and killing his sister-in-law. Go check the movie. It's a masterpiece. I have one that most people seem to not know about. Grand Duchess Anastasia was in fact killed with the rest of her family in 1918. She never escaped, and the several women throughout the 20th century claiming to be her lied. The site of the execution of the Tsar and his family was completely untouched until 1991. Excavation found only 9 of the 11 expected remains. It wasn't until 2007 that 2 further sets of remains were found a small distance away from the previous gravesite. DNA testing found that one of the sets of remains belonged to Tsarevich Alexei and the other to one of his sisters. With this find, it proved conclusively that the entire imperial family was in fact executed and buried in 1918. The Pioneer Gravity Anomaly. Space probe wasn't accelerating away from Earth the way we'd predicted. But it didn't get noticed until the probe got way the duck out there. Next space probe gets launched. Gets way out there. Same thing happens. WTF. How does acceleration not work right? Does gravity just change really far away? Turns out the heat from the radioactive death generator was all coming off the same side of the space probe. And the extra particle radiation gave a thermal recoil force resulting in an extra acceleration of, no kidding, about 0.0000000000874 ms2. Over enough distance. It all counts. The radioactive death generator. The what now? The prophet hen of Leeds. A hen was laying eggs with messages like "Christ is coming" and people thought the world was ending. Turned out the farmer was actually writing on the eggs herself. and then reinserted it back into the chicken. Reinserted it back into the chicken. Mary Toft. I mean. Really? What the duck? TL. DR. NSFW. Woman starts giving birth to copious amounts of rabbit parts. Woman taken to London and studied under intense supervision. Turns out she was shoving the pieces up there days before for the publicity. The tomb of Jesus' previously unknown brother turned out to be a hoax to try to sell the tomb of a nobody for a lot of money. Bermuda Triangle Devil's Sea. A triangle-shaped section of ocean where airplanes and boats were known to disappear. Apparently most stories were embellished. And there is so much traffic that goes through the area, it's actually a very small amount of vessels that go missing, percentage-wise. Molyneux's problem. If a man born blind can feel the differences between shapes such as spheres and cubes, could he, if given the ability to see, distinguish those objects by sight alone? In reference to the tactile schemata he already possessed? The Marfa Mystery Lights. Small town in West Texas has lights that can be seen dancing off the horizon in a certain spot some nights. For many years the source of the light was not known and explanations ranged from mass hysteria to the ever popular UFO. One researcher finally figured it out. The elevation changes and desert air would occasionally combine to distort and project headlights from cars on a highway several miles away. Reports of the mystery lights from times prior to the highway or automobiles are probably campfires in the general area of the highway. Like many highways, the area was already used as a road for quite a long time. The story of the Toynbee tiles always fascinated me. In the 1980s all these tiles started to appear in major cities across the US. Mostly around Philadelphia. They were laid in the ground, in the middle of the streets, and no one knew how they appeared there. They had strange messages. Toynbee idea in Kubrick's 2001 Resurrect Dead on planet Jupiter. There's an amazing documentary about this guy who noticed the tiles and went on a quest to figure out how they were appearing and who was creating them. The tiles are actually in the asphalt, which is not an easy feat. In the doc, Justin Dior finds the guy and figures out how he does it with a car that has no passenger seat and a hole in the bottom. It's a beautifully heartbreaking story and I highly recommend watching it. Late to the party. Q Lazarus, who recorded the haunting Goodbye Horses that was later included in the soundtrack for Silence of the Lambs, was a mystery for many years. It turns out that she recorded exactly 2 singles, retired from music, and is now a bus driver. Christine Jessup. Christine was a 9-year-old Canadian girl from Queensville, Ontario who was abducted, arped, and murdered in October 1984. Her body was found about 50 kilometers, 31 mi, from her home in Durham region on New Year's Eve of the same year. On the 15th of October, 2020, police officials announced that using a new technique for tracing criminals through the DNA of their relatives, they had concluded Jessup was killed by Calvin Hoover. Fast radio bursts, or FRBs. First discovered in 2007. It's a radio pulse a few milliseconds long, typically coming from extragalactic sources. In April of 2020, the Chime Radio Telescope found the first one recorded in the Milky Way. The source was a magnetar, a highly magnetic remnant of a large dead star. Magnetars are a special kind of neutron star because they have such an intensely strong magnetic field. If a magnetar was a moon's distance away, it would be able to rip your car keys out of your pocket. What causes these FRBs is a magnetoquake. Magnetars are so dense that the surface is under a lot of strain to collapse and toward the core, but the physical density of the neutron star is holding it back. A very slight shift in the crust of the magnetar releases a huge burst of X-rays, gamma rays along with radio waves. And that is the fast radio bursts we see. Lori Erica Ruff. A secretive woman dies and her husband finds a whole bunch of documents showing she was living under a false identity. Tons of crazy ideas about who and what she was. But a few years ago DNA showed she was a Pennsylvania runaway named Kimberly. My missing passport. While in Mexico in 1998, I lost my passport about a week before I was supposed to leave. I didn't have much with me and searched for days. I took everything out of my bags several times. I was sure I left it in my suitcase. Ultimately, I had to leave without it after calling the university I was attending, who helped me contact the embassy. Years later, I found the passport in the suitcase. I had searched a half dozen times looking for the passport. I had even used that suitcase many times since Mexico. The passport had gotten under the lining, buttoned down with metal studs, and then worked its way partiality back out again. Devil's toy box. People would apparently go mad, die, go catatonic in this black barn lined with mirrors. Turned out it was just cool stories based on a legend. The barn's real, but it's not. 1408. Okay. 1. Case of the beet bandit. Missing beets from all over the farm. No footprints. Inside job. Mows in socks. Boom. Case closed. It. The same 6 stories about the Romanovs. Die to Love. Comma Pass. Bloop. Bermuda Triangle. Loch Ness. Jack the Ripper. As if everyone saw the question and hit up Wikipedia for the list of solved long-term mysteries and cribbed off it. Food kept disappearing from our house faster than ever. Turned out our teenage son was smoking pot. In 1970, a new dinosaur was named Dinoceras mirificus, which basically meant weird horrible hand, because all they had of it were a pair of massive arms. 4 meters long. Until 2014, when new specimens were discovered. Nobody had a clue what it looked like or what it did with its life. But we now know it looked like a long-armed giant spoonbill with a camel hump. Nice. Edited just to confirm. Its beak wasn't quite spoonbill length, proportionately, but the essential shape is much the same. The blue D6 that my sister always wanted to use was actually weighted to roll 6 more often. Why there are suddenly foots washing ashore with the shoes still on. Turns out people wear different types of shoes than a few decades ago. The sole of the shoe is more foamy and so the shoe will stay afloat. When people drown, their bodies are consumed by the fish, and they eat soft flesh first from these bodies, which is around our ankles. So the feet will come off first. Previously the foot would just sink. But with the latest Nikes it will stay afloat and eventually wash ashore. Scientists spent 37 years trying to figure out where monarch butterflies go in the winter. They spent a ton of time searching in Texas because that was the southernmost location of where tagged butterflies were found. But the people in Mexico simply didn't get the memo that anyone was looking. Until an American tourist found a butterfly tagged in Canada hundreds of miles south of Texas in the mountains near Mexico City. My social security card had been inserted into the, from then on non-functional, disc reader of my PS4 by my small nephew. Well, they finally solved the case of the East Valley rapist after 20 years. It was a border patrol agent the whole time. Check out a guy named Joe Kender. Solved more than 90% of his homicide cases. How the ancient Egyptians built the pyramids. A French architect figured it out. They used an internal ramp system. Some of the turn stations for the ramps are still there. Really quite brilliant. The solution does not disappoint. What happened to my Halloween candy every year since I was 2? After years of getting said that someone doesn't put the peanut butter lid on tight enough. Once I moved out a few years ago. The 1845 Franklin Arctic Expedition. 2 ships vanished searching for the Northwest Passage to Asia. Recovery expeditions found abandoned equipment, clothing, and remains scattered around the area. No explanation for why the crews vanished, left the ship wandered away sporadically. Turns out a significant portion of their food was canned, fairly new technology for the time, and contained higher levels of lead. As the expedition continued, the persons in authority suffered serious cognitive impairments due to the poisoning. Recovered bodies showed signs of pneumonia. tuberculosis, anorexia, later scurvy and starvation that lead to paranoia and cannibalism. It wasn't the lead poisoning, as all food rations of that type had the same lead soldering. It was a zinc deficiency, due to a lack of meat in their diet. The heightened lead concentration in tissue samples taken from a few of their graves was due to the body breaking down fat and muscle cells to stave off starvation. The built-up lead stored over time in their cells then was circulated through their bodies shortly before death. This caused findings from the 1980s expeditions to claim that lead poisoning was a factor in their deaths. Whether the city of Troy really existed or was just legend, it did. Some German guy who got rich in early industrialization used his wealth to search for it. Pretty much all the scholars of the time said it was a fool's errand. Then he actually found it. It has been solved and confirmed that the hedge funds did not, I repeat, did not cover their shorts in Jan when GME started to rocket. Where my glasses went for a month. I wear those thick-rimmed black 1960s style glasses. One day they disappeared. My wife and I searched our 1,500 square feet apartment for days. Checked under cushions, under every piece of furniture, just everywhere. It was weird. I jokingly blamed the cats. This is recent during the pandemic, so I rarely leave the house. I was hoping I left them in our building lobby, but they never showed up. So they were gone for a month, and then while I was out shopping my wife texts, "I found your glasses." Turns out they somehow made their way into an open top box of scarves that she keeps on a low shelf. There's no way I would have dropped them in there, and I seriously doubt my wife was secretly messing with me. The only conclusion is that our rambunctious 9-month-old kitten grabbed them off a table and helpfully stashed them away for me. I've got them back now and I'm watching her closely from now on. Didn't the Dyatlov Pass incident get solved pretty recently? I saw a pretty good explanation on YouTube putting together that the tent was likely cut from the inside to escape the smoke from an oven exhaust that caught fire. Some stay behind to stop the fire from destroying all their equipment, and others went to try and make a new fire to prevent freezing. And the whole radiation point was due to the fact that some of the people in the expedition actually worked with radiation in labs. Not sure if all of those are regarded as facts now, though. I swim in lakes with literally thousands of dead bodies and never really worry about it. Michigan, Superior, Huron. How is this a mystery? Crop circles. In 2009, the Attorney General for the island state of Tasmania stated that Australian wallabies had been found creating crop circles in fields of opium poppies, which are grown legally for medicinal use, after consuming some of the opiate-laden poppies and running in circles. Quite a recent mystery. But there were screenshots of the Big Comfy Couch video game circulating that had people confused. Namely, as one of the screenshots showed not just combat against the dust bunnies, but what appeared to be blood splatters, which is kind of antithetical to a kids show like the Big Comfy Couch. After a bit of poking around, it turned out that one of the developers found out that people were circulating that mystery, and confirmed the game was not only legitimate, but the reason for the blood splatters was that the game was built off of an action games engine that had blood splatter abilities enabled by default. And he just forgot to turn it off. He also jovially referred to it as GRP juice. He also ended up showing 2 other games that ran off that same engine. And one of those was honestly probably more interesting than the Big Comfy Couch game. It was a massive Capcom crossover. El Supersonic has a good pair of videos on the ordeal. It's pretty interesting. Atlantis isn't real. The story is an allegory in Plato's works that fit right within Greek sensibilities and interests, incorporating things the Greeks would have known about intimately and with interest, like authors are wont to do. He also just made stuff up that was never there, because he could be a wily DCK. There are lost cities and structures in the ocean, but they are not Atlantis. There is this weird notion that ancient people were stupid, and this leads to a kind of literal interpretation and broad, reductive generalizing of their beliefs that are clearly, provably false, but exist nonetheless. Ancient people knew what metaphors and other artistic techniques are. And it actively harms progress to be reductive about the past and dishonest in the present. The bloop. As I recall, it was a tremendous sound registered by US equipment under the sea. Back in 1997. It resembled the vocalization of some enormous creature, which would have dwarfed anything known to science. For over a decade this was my favorite "there's something huge out there that we've never seen" story. Turns out it was just an ice shelf breaking off. The case of the Starkick 8,462,852's inconsistent light patterns. At first, people couldn't figure out why there was this fluctuation in the star's light and were considering the possibility it might be a Dyson sphere built by an alien civilization. A Dyson sphere is a hypothetical structure built around a star to capture as much of its light as possible. But then they concluded that dust is probably the reason behind the fluctuation, since new data showed that different colors of light are being blocked differently, which indicates that what's blocking the light isn't opaque like a Dyson sphere. That phone I was looking for was in my hand the whole time. The Kensington Rock. Found by an American farmer in like late 1800s? Maybe? Covered in Old Norse runes, which were claimed to be from around the year 1000. Which would prove that there were white settlers in America long before Columbus, thereby justifying a lot of the white supremacist claims of the 20th century. Later proved to have been forged by a Swedish settler, just for fun, some 100 years prior, and people are still making documentaries on it, claiming it to be some wild unrevealed truth of America's colonization. Sorry for bad grammar. I have heated opinions on the matter and am in a rush. Edit. I have found myself to be a lying liar. The runestone was falsely dated to 1362. Not 1000. Edit 2. Whoa. How the fricking frack did this get 1k upvotes and an award? Delighted to see that other people have strong opinions on this. Also, I am definitely not an archaeologist. This rant was supposed to reach like 30 people, not 1000 plus. Chelsea Bruck's murderer. A girl went to a Halloween party dressed as Poison Ivy, not knowing that it would be her last party. Chelsea Bruck was last seen alive on the 31st of October with a man in costume in the wee hours. 3 weeks later, she was found dead in an empty field. Police were unable to identify the mystery man for almost 2 years but finally arrested Daniel Clay in the summer of 2016. Investigations led to Daniel's girlfriend, who claims that Daniel confessed to her about the heinous crime he committed a couple of years ago. Daniel faced a tough jury, which sentenced him a daunting punishment of life sentence. It is believed that Daniel escaped the capital punishment as he was only charged with second-degree murder. That missing socks and Tupperware lids are partying hard together in some alternate universe. I found my car keys. Turns out my 2-year-old put them in the refrigerator. Maybe you think I put it in there by mistake? No. There was a doll keeping it company. Amelia Earhart. She crashed. They found some remains. Also, the Bermuda Triangle. It was all bullshit to begin with. That portion of the sea is no more and no less dangerous than the rest of the ocean. Many claims of ships or planes lost are either a complete fabrication, or they are actual incidents misplaced to make it look like it happened in the triangle. They haven't definitively proved that they found Amelia Earhart, but there is a plane in the water that they think is likely hers. But underwater erosion is no joke, so it's hard to confirm. The picnic at Hanging Rock. Turns out, despite popular theories, it wasn't based on a true story. It was entirely fictional. Remember that whole Toyota start accelerating on their own and the drivers can't slow them down thing? After much speculation that there was some software bug or faulty gas pedals, an investigation determined that every case of spontaneous acceleration was either the result of the floor mat getting stuck on top of the gas pedal or the driver slamming the gas pedal instead of the brake pedal when trying to stop quickly. There was also an issue with faulty accelerator pedals. It wasn't just floor mats. The 21st of January, 2010 OSOR US. 2. 3 million Toyota vehicles recalled due to faulty accelerator pedals. The pedal mechanism could be worn and become harder to depress, slower to return, or, in the worst case, stuck in a partially depressed position. Vaccines don't cause autism. This wasn't even a mystery, lol. I think it was disproven, but it was hard to find an exact source on it, so I will ask. EM Drive? The man from Tord. No parallel universes. Just a dude with a fake passport. All the Bigfoot tracks turned out to be some guy who made special shoes and just left them everywhere to duck with people. Where the Titanic ended up. People thought it would never be found. 3 major discoveries go to marine archaeologist and geophysicist Dr. Robert Ballard for 1. Deep sea hydrothermal vents that support an abundance of plant and animal life where no light reaches despite the 400 C temps, high pressures, and toxic effluent. This deviated from previous scientific beliefs paradigms that sunlight was needed for life to thrive. Led to discovery of hundreds of previously unknown life forms and validating chemosynthesis. 2. Found and explored the Titanic, preserving it historically and respectfully as a mass grave site. 3. Found the WWII German mega battleship Bismarck. Dr. Ballard's resume represents a 50-year career in who's who among marine scientists.